Hi, I'm Maeve Sullivan. 3 weeks ago, my sister called to uninvite me from Thanksgiving dinner. Last week, my mother texted that they'd reserved the best table at Harvest and Vine for their celebration. Yesterday, I watched them walk through the doors of my restaurant, the one they never knew I owned, and ask for a table I'd purposely kept vacant. Sometimes, satisfaction tastes better than turkey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The text arrived at 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday in early November. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop while I was pouring my first cup of coffee, still half asleep in the pale morning light filtering through my kitchen blinds. The Northeast. Autumn had turned bitter overnight, frost etching delicate patterns on my windows. I ignored the message at first, savoring the steaming coffee and the rare moment of calm before my day began. When I finally glanced down, I saw my mother's name, Maeve Sullivan, a woman who believed that communication was most effective when delivered like a swift, precise incision. We've decided to keep Thanksgiving intimate this year, just immediate family at Harvest and Vine. I'm sure you understand. I set the phone down and stared out the window at the gray Connecticut sky. Intimate, immediate family. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. 3 years of culinary school, 7 years climbing the restaurant ranks in New York and Boston, and 2 years as the silent owner of Harvest and Vine, one of the most sought-after reservations in Greenwich, and my own mother still referred to me as if I were a distant acquaintance. An afterthought. Thanksgiving had always been my holiday. Even as a teenager, when Paige was winning debate championships and Fletcher was securing his football scholarship, I was the one mastering my grandmother's cornbread stuffing recipe, perfecting the ratio of sage to thyme, the amount of butter needed to make it rich without becoming greasy. My family had always graciously accepted my contributions without ever acknowledging the hours of preparation or the fact that cooking was the language through which I expressed love. I almost texted back, almost typed, "Harvest and Vine is booked. Solid for Thanksgiving, has been for months." But I didn't. Instead, I slipped my phone into my pocket, drained my coffee, and headed to work. My apartment was small but mine. A converted loft above an antique store in a historic building downtown. The walk to my restaurant took exactly 12 minutes. Past the harbor with its bobbing sailboats and the row of high-end boutiques where I couldn't afford to shop until 2 years ago. The morning air bit at my cheeks as I pulled my coat tighter, a gift I'd bought myself after the restaurant's first profitable quarter. Serena was already there when I arrived, counting inventory and humming softly to herself. At 24, she had the kind of natural talent I recognized immediately. The instinctive understanding of flavor profiles, the ability to create something extraordinary from seemingly nothing. She reminded me of myself at that age, except Serena had something I never did, a mentor who saw her potential. "Morning, boss," she called without looking up from her clipboard. The local honey delivery came in. It's the good stuff, dark amber, straight from those hives in Westport. I hung my coat on the rack by the office door. "Perfect. We'll use it for the baklava special this weekend." She nodded, still writing. "Oh, and Marcus called. The Thanksgiving reservations are overbooked." By 3 tables. He's freaking out a little. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to my mother's message, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. I'd moved past that particular emotion years ago, but resolve. Clear and cold as the morning. "Tell him I'll handle it," I said. "And let's do a menu tasting tonight for Thanksgiving. I want to change the cranberry component." Serena looked up, eyebrow raised. "Change it? 2 weeks before? Are you sure?" I nodded. Sometimes things need to be rearranged to make room for what matters. The day passed in a blur of vendor calls, staff meetings, and recipe refinements. By evening, when the restaurant filled with its usual Tuesday crowd, local business people, couples on date nights, a few regular food enthusiasts who knew to request the off-menu items. I had almost forgotten about my mother's text. Almost. At 8:30, as I was plating a special for a food critic from Hartford, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my sister. "Mom says you're not coming for Thanksgiving. Honestly, it's probably better this way. Fletcher's bringing Isabel's parents, and you know how awkward it gets when you're around people with actual social skills." Paige had always had a talent for making cruelty sound casual, as if her barbs were simply observations anyone might make. Growing up, she had been the golden child, student body president, valedictorian, now an attorney at a prestigious firm, with a husband whose family name appeared on buildings around the city. She had mastered our mother's technique of dismissal by the time she was 12. I set down my phone without responding and focused on the perfect drizzle of sauce across the plate before me. The rhythmic movement calmed me, as it always had. In the kitchen, there was order, precise measurements, predictable chemical reactions, the satisfaction of creation. Unlike family, cooking never betrayed me. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the kitchen gleamed from its nightly cleaning, I sat in my office reviewing the Thanksgiving reservations. The Sullivan party of 7 was there, scheduled for 4 p.m., requested by Fletcher. Table 9, the best in the house, with views of both the harbor and the central fireplace. My brother had never visited Harvest and Vine, though he lived less than 20 minutes away. Neither had Paige or my mother. When I'd sent them invitations after the opening, my mother had replied that exotic farm-to-table concepts weren't really their style. They preferred traditional dining experiences. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had purchased the struggling restaurant through a holding company 2 years ago, keeping my name deliberately off any public records. The previous owner had been my mentor, Giorgio, who'd taken me under his wing when I was just a line cook with raw talent and a desperate need to prove myself. When he decided to retire to Italy, he offered me first chance to buy the place before it went to market. I'd taken out loans, leveraged everything I had, and worked 18-hour days to transform it into the kind of establishment that now required reservations weeks in advance. I'd kept my ownership quiet, serving as executive chef publicly while running every aspect of the business privately. It wasn't about creating a big reveal. It was about finally building something that was entirely mine, something that couldn't be diminished by family commentary. I traced my finger across the reservation list, pausing at the Sullivan entry. With a few keystrokes, I could delete it, let them arrive to find no record of their booking. But that wasn't my style. Instead, I did something more subtle. I reassigned them from table 9 to table 14, tucked near the kitchen entrance, where the noise level was higher and the ambiance less refined. Then I began planning a menu that would tell my story in a way words never could. The week before Thanksgiving passed in a flurry of preparation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I tested and retested the special menu I'd created, refining each element until it sang with flavor and meaning. The staff sensed something different about me, a focused intensity beyond my usual perfectionism. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked on Sunday night as we reviewed the final arrangements. Marcus had been with me from the beginning, a front-of-house manager whose intuitive understanding of people made him invaluable. "You seem, I don't know, like you're cooking for the queen or something." I smiled, arranging the seating. Chart 1 final time. "Just want Thursday to be perfect." He glanced at the chart, noticing the unusual arrangement. "You've got the Sullivan party at table 14? That's not our best spot." "Trust me," I said quietly. "It's where they belong." On Wednesday night, I barely slept. I lay awake, watching the shadows shift across my ceiling, rehearsing the next day in my mind. Not with anxiety, but with a strange, calm certainty. For once, I wasn't the one being arranged and adjusted to fit someone else's picture of family. The control was mine. I arrived at the restaurant at 5 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. The kitchen was silent, waiting. I turned on the lights, fired up the ovens, and began the slow, methodical process of creating a meal that would speak truths I had never been able to voice aloud. By noon, the staff had arrived, and the kitchen hummed with activity. The first reservations would begin at 2 p.m. with my family scheduled for 4 Hajj. I moved through the space with precision, tasting, adjusting, guiding. This was my domain, where my voice mattered, where what I created was valued. At 3:45, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "The Sullivan party is here. Early." I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. "Seat them at table 14 as planned." I watched through the small window in the kitchen door as my family was led to their table. My mother in her characteristic navy blue, spine rigid as a ruler. Paige in an expensive cream sweater, her husband looking bored beside her. Fletcher and his fiancée Isabel, picture perfect as always, with Isabel's parents completing the group. They looked uncomfortable as they settled into the less desirable location, my mother's gaze sweeping the restaurant, taking in the better tables with barely disguised disapproval. I waited 10 minutes before approaching their table, removing my chef's coat and smoothing down the simple black dress I'd changed into. My hands were steady as I pushed through the kitchen doors and walked across the dining room. It took them a moment to notice me, and then another moment to recognize me. My mother recovered first, her surprise quickly masked behind a tight smile. "Maeve, what are you doing here?" I stood at the head of their table, acutely aware of the other diners around us, the soft music, the scent of sage and rosemary hanging in the air. "I work here," I said simply. Paige's expression shifted from confusion to something like amusement. "You're a waitress? Well, that's nice. Very seasonal." I didn't correct her. "Not yet. I noticed your reservation." What a coincidence. Fletcher at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We didn't know you worked here, May. Mom just said this was the new hotspot in town." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, this is awkward. I specifically chose somewhere neutral." "Neutral?" I repeated, feeling the word like a slap. "You mean somewhere I wouldn't be?" Silence fell over the table. In the background, I could hear other families laughing, glasses clinking, the normal sounds of celebration continuing around us. "Perhaps this isn't the place for this discussion," my mother said, her voice low. "We're customers here, after all." The moment stretched between us. 3 years ago, I might have apologized. 2 years ago, I might have walked away. But today, I simply nodded once. "You're right. You are customers." I signaled to Marcus, who approached with a bottle of champagne. "And as the owner and executive chef of Harvest and Vine, I'd like to welcome you properly." The shock that rippled across their faces was almost worth every holiday spent in the shadow of their dismissal. Almost. "Owner?" Paige's voice had lost its smug edge. "Since when?" 2 years, I said, accepting the champagne from Marcus and beginning to pour. "Since Giorgio retired. You remember him, the chef I apprenticed under, the one you told me was a waste of my potential." My mother's face had gone slightly pale. "You never mentioned that I bought the restaurant, that I've built it into one of the most successful establishments in Greenwich, that I'm the reason you had to book your table 3 months in advance?" I finished pouring the last glass. "You never asked." Isabel's father, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, cleared his throat. "Well, congratulations. The place looks remarkable." I turned to him with a genuine smile. "Thank you. We're very proud of what we've created here." "We thought you were still at that little cafe in Stamford," my mother said, her voice strangely defensive. "You never update us on your career." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. I sent invitations to the opening, to all of— Ew. Fletcher at least had the decency to look ashamed. I remember that. I meant to come, but work was crazy and— It's fine, I said, cutting him off. Really? What matters is that you're here now, and I've prepared something special for your table. I nodded to the servers who had been waiting discreetly nearby. They approached with the first course, a sophisticated reinterpretation of cornbread. Stuffing, the recipe my grandmother had taught me, transformed into something both familiar and elevated. This is the first dish I ever mastered, I explained as the plates were set down. Though none of you ever knew that. I was 14 and practiced it 17 times before Thanksgiving that year. Mom, you complimented Aunt Judith on it, if I recall. My mother's hand paused halfway to her water glass. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. The meal continued in this vein. Each course a story, each plate a memory rewritten. The turkey, brined for 3 days in a special blend that had won recognition in food magazines. The cranberry component, not sauce, but a sophisticated gas streak that balanced sweet, tart, and savory in perfect harmony. Each element spoke of skill earned through years of dedication, of passion that had survived despite indifference. As the main course was cleared, I noticed something shifting in my family's expressions. It wasn't just the awkwardness of discovering they'd been dining in my establishment all along. It was the slow, dawning recognition of what they had missed. Years. Of my growth, my struggles, my triumphs. This is extraordinary, Maeve, Fletcher said finally, breaking a lengthy silence. Truly. I had no idea you were capable of this. He gestured around the restaurant, now filled with happy diners. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a curious emptiness. His praise, genuine as it seemed, came too late and asked too little of him. Thank you, I said simply. But I've always been capable. You just never noticed. Paige, who had been unusually quiet, set down her napkin. So this whole thing, inviting us here, was it just to make us feel bad? To show us up? I considered her question carefully before answering. No, I didn't invite you. You chose this restaurant. The universe has an interesting sense of humor sometimes. Dessert arrived, a delicate pumpkin creation that deconstructed the traditional pie into something more complex, yet still comforting. As my family ate, I watched them, really saw them, perhaps for the first time in years. They were as I had always known them, but somehow smaller, less intimidating. My mother's criticism, Paige's cutting remarks, Fletcher's casual dismissal, they had shaped me, yes, but they no longer defined me. As coffee was served, my mother finally addressed the elephant in the room. Why didn't you tell us? About the restaurant, about your success. Why keep it secret? I met her gaze steadily. Would it have mattered? She flinched slightly. Of course it would have. Would it? 3 weeks ago, you uninvited me from Thanksgiving dinner. Not because we argued or because I'd done something wrong, but because I simply didn't fit into your picture of intimate family. I've spent my entire life trying to earn a place at your table. It took owning this restaurant to realize I deserve a seat at any table I choose. The silence that followed was profound. Around us, other families were finishing their meals, laughing, sharing, connecting in ways mine never had. Yet strangely, I felt no envy. Only a quiet certainty that I had finally found my place. Not in their narrative, but in my own. As they prepared to leave, I walked them to the door. Fletcher hung back, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. May, I'm sorry. I've been. He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. I smiled at him, a real smile, free of the resentment I'd carried for so long. It's okay, Fletcher. Really. This isn't about making you feel guilty. It's about me finally understanding my own worth." He nodded, eyes downcast. The meal was incredible. Seriously, the best Thanksgiving dinner I've ever had. "Thank you." I touched his arm lightly. "Maybe next year you'll come because you want to share it with me, not because it's the hot new reservation in town." My mother was the last to leave, pausing at the threshold. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something meaningful, perhaps even apologize. Instead, she straightened her already perfect posture and said, "The cranberry element was unexpected, but quite good." Coming from her, it was practically effusive praise. I accepted it with a nod. "Good night, Mom. Drive safely." After they left, I returned to the kitchen, where the staff was busy preparing for the evening's remaining reservations. Serena looked up from the dessert station, curiosity written across her face. "So, that was your family?" I nodded, picking up a towel and wiping down an already clean counter. "That was them." "And they had no idea you owned this place, even though it has a Michelin star?" I smiled slightly. "They live in a different world, one where my achievements don't register unless they fit a certain mold." Serena shook her head in disbelief. "Well, their loss. That special menu you created? Pure genius. The way you balance tradition with innovation." She trailed off, returning to her plating. "Anyway, I hope they appreciated it." "I'm not sure they did," I said honestly. "But, for the first time, I'm okay with that." Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the kitchen had been cleaned to my exacting standards, I sat alone at table 9, the best table in the house, the one I hadn't given my family. The harbor lights twinkled through the windows, and the embers in the fireplace cast a warm glow across the empty restaurant. My phone buzzed with a text from Fletcher. "Dinner was amazing. We should talk soon. Really talk." I set the phone down without responding. There would be time for that conversation, but not tonight. Tonight belonged to me. I poured myself a glass of the special reserve wine we'd been saving and raised it in a silent toast to the empty room. To the journey that had brought me here, to the strength I'd found not in their approval, but in its absence. To the realization that sometimes the family we create through shared passion and purpose is more nurturing than the one we're born into. The wine was perfect, complex, balanced, satisfying. Like the life I had built for myself, one careful selection at a time. Have you ever been overlooked by the very people who should see you most clearly? Have you found your voice despite their silence? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. Your stories of resilience and reinvention inspire me every day, and tomorrow's video might just be the one you've been waiting for. The first guests began arriving at Harvest and Vine promptly at 2 p.m., right as the afternoon light softened over the harbor. I had been in the kitchen since dawn, directing the symphony of preparation with a calm I didn't entirely feel. Every plate had to be perfect, not just for my family, who were scheduled to arrive at 4 SAO, but for every person who had chosen to spend their holiday with us. I believed that intention transferred to food. Anxiety produced tense flavors, while confidence created harmony. "Chef, the Johnsons are requesting you at table 3, Marcus called through the kitchen door. "They're celebrating their 40th anniversary today." I passed the basting spoon to Serena and wiped my hands. "Keep an eye on the reduction. If it gets too thick, add the reserved stock, just a splash at a time." She nodded, already focused on the task. That was what I loved about my team. Their commitment mirrored my own. We weren't just preparing meals. We were crafting experiences, memories that would linger long after the last bite. The Johnsons beamed as I approached their table, the husband reaching out to clasp my hand in both of his. They had been coming to Harvest and Vine since our opening weekend, when they wandered in without a reservation, and I'd managed to squeeze them into a corner table. Now they visited every month, always requesting the same server and often sending handwritten thank you notes afterward. "Chef Sullivan," Mrs. Johnson said warmly. "We couldn't imagine celebrating anywhere else. The hostess told us you've prepared something special for today?" I smiled, genuinely pleased by their loyalty. "A new tasting menu, just for Thanksgiving, and a little anniversary surprise with dessert. Thank you for choosing to spend this day with us." As I returned to the kitchen, I glanced at the reservation book open near the host stand. The Sullivan party of 7, 4:00 p.m., table 14. Seeing it in black and white made it real in a way that still felt surreal. My family, who had never once visited my restaurant in the 2 years since I'd purchased it, who had no idea it was mine, would be sitting down to a meal I'd created. Not because they had finally decided to support me, but through pure coincidence, or perhaps fate has a keener sense of irony than we give it credit for. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had struggled to earn a place at their table. Now they would be seated at mine. At 3:15, I stepped outside for a brief moment of fresh air. The temperature had dropped, and my breath frosted in the late November chill. Across the street, a family was walking together toward the waterfront. Park, parents, grandparents, children all bundled in colorful scarves and mittens, laughing as one of the kids skipped ahead. I watched them, feeling a familiar hollow sensation expand beneath my ribs. That particular ache had been my constant companion during holidays. The longing for a connection that never quite materialized, for recognition that always remained, just out of reach. I had spent so many years trying to translate my worth into terms my family might understand, hoping that achievement might finally bridge the gap between us. There had been a time, after culinary school, when I thought things might change. I'd graduated at the top of my class, secured a position at a restaurant with 2 Michelin stars, been featured in a regional cooking magazine. I'd sent the clipping to my mother, expecting, what? Surprise? Pride? Instead, she'd called to ask if I was still playing around with that cooking thing, or if I was finally ready to consider something with actual career prospects, like the hospital administration role her friend had mentioned. That was the day I'd stopped sharing my accomplishments. What was the point if they would always be translated into another language of disappointment? I hadn't realized I'd been standing outside for so long until Marcus poked his head out the door. "Chef, the Harris's soufflés are ready for the final touch and—" His voice dropped lower. "Your family just called. They're running about 15 minutes early." I nodded, feeling my professional mask slide back into place. "Thank you, Marcus. Let's get those soufflés finished and—" I paused, a decision crystallizing. Move the Sullivans to table 9. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. I had been adamant about placing them at the less desirable table 14, with its proximity to the kitchen door and limited view. "Table 9? That's our best table." I thought. "I've reconsidered," I said, surprising myself with the calm certainty in my voice. "They should see exactly what I've built here, the full experience." "Consider it done," he said with a slight smile, disappearing. Back inside. I followed, pausing at the small mirror in the hallway to check my appearance. My dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and my chef's whites were still immaculate despite the hours of cooking. I straightened my shoulders and took a steadying breath. Today wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving something to them. It was about finally claiming my own space, my own value, regardless of whether they ever recognized it. The next hour passed in a blur of orchestrated chaos, plates being finished and sent out, compliments flowing back to the kitchen, the controlled frenzy that was Thanksgiving service at a premier restaurant. I moved between stations, tasting, adjusting, guiding my team with a focus that pushed everything else temporarily from my mind. Until Marcus appeared at my side, voice low. "They're here." I glanced up at the clock, 3:47 p.m. "Who's serving their table?" "Eliza. She's our best." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. Perfect. Let me know when they're settled. We'll start with the amuse-bouche I prepared specially, the one with the nasturtium and pickled cranberry. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on my choice. The flavor profile was bold, almost challenging, a fitting introduction to what would follow. I busied myself with plating the next round of appetizers, aware of a strange doubled consciousness. As I worked, part of me was fully present, immersed in the precision of my craft, while another part hovered above it all, watching with detached curiosity as this long-imagined scenario finally unfolded. Chef? It was Eliza this time, her expression carefully neutral. The Sullivans are asking if they could speak with the executive chef. They say they want to compliment the amuse-bouche. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, considering. Tell them the chef will visit tables after the main course has been served. Standard procedure. She nodded and retreated. Through the small window in the kitchen door, I caught a glimpse of my mother's profile, her silver-streaked hair styled in the same elegant bob she'd worn for decades, her posture impeccable as always. Even from this distance, I could read the subtle signs of her displeasure, the slight tightness around her mouth, the way she rearranged her silverware just so. Marjorie Sullivan had elevated passive disapproval to an art form. Growing up, I had learned to decode her silence, to read volumes in the arch of an eyebrow or the precise way she folded her napkin. It was a language of restraint, of expectations communicated but never explicitly stated, of judgments rendered without the messiness of actual confrontation. Fletcher, seated beside her, looked much the same as he had at my grandfather's funeral. Last year, the last time we'd been in the same room. His brown hair was expensively cut. His smile came easily, and his presence filled space effortlessly, just as it always had. As the only son, he had inherited my father's natural charm along, with his broad shoulders and easy confidence. In our family hierarchy, he had never had to fight for attention. It flowed toward him naturally, like water seeking its level. Paige sat across from them, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her husband Julian was absorbed in his phone, nodding occasionally at whatever she was saying. Completing the table were Isabel and her parents, strangers to me, though Fletcher had been engaged to Isabel for nearly a year. They looked so normal. A family gathering for a holiday meal, indistinguishable from any other group in the restaurant. Anyone observing would never guess at the complicated web of unspoken hurts and expectations that connected us, or rather, failed to connect us. I turned back to my station, focusing on the delicate process of searing scallops to golden perfection while maintaining their translucent centers. The familiar rhythm of kitchen work centered me, as it always had. Here, I knew exactly who I was and what was expected of me. Here, my value was clear and unmistakable. First course for Table 9 is ready, I announced, placing the final touches on 7 identical plates. The appetizer was a sophisticated play on traditional flavors: seared scallops with butternut squash puree, crispy sage, and brown butter emulsion. Simple yet refined, familiar yet elevated. Eliza and another server whisked them away, and I moved on to supervising the plating of the next round of dishes for other tables. 10 minutes later, Eliza returned. They're asking about the chef again. The brother specifically wants to know if they could meet you before the main course. He's quite insistent. I glanced at the clock. Almost time for the main course for my family's table. I made a decision. Tell them the chef will be out with their entrees personally. I spent the next 20 minutes in focused preparation, directing my team with precision as we assembled the main course. The centerpiece was heritage turkey prepared 3 ways: brined breast, confit leg, and a roulade with house-made sausage and dried cherries. Accompanying it were hazelnut-studded Brussels sprouts, potato puree with roasted garlic and rosemary, and the cranberry gastrique that cut through the richness with bright acidity. As we completed the plating, I removed my chef's coat and smoothed down the simple black dress I'd chosen to wear underneath today. It was fitted without being showy, professional but elegant. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, the owner and executive chef of one of the most respected restaurants in the state, not the afterthought daughter they'd dismissed for so long. "Ready, chef?" Marcus asked, standing by with the first 2 plates. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's go." We moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, a small parade of servers carrying the carefully constructed plates. As we approached table 9, I saw the exact moment recognition dawned on each face: confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been embarrassment flickering across their features in rapid succession. My mother recovered first, her surprise quickly masked behind a tight smile. "Maeve? What are you doing here?" I stood at the head of their table, acutely aware of the other diners around us, the soft music, the scent of sage and rosemary hanging in the air. "I work here," I said simply, as the servers placed the plates in front of each person. Paige's expression shifted from confusion to something like amusement. "You're a waitress? Well, that's nice. Very seasonal." I didn't correct her assumption. Not yet. "I noticed your reservation. What a coincidence." Fletcher at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We didn't know you worked here, May. Mom just said this was the new hotspot in town." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, this is awkward. I specifically chose somewhere neutral." "Neutral?" I repeated, feeling the word like a slap. "You mean somewhere I wouldn't be?" Silence fell over the table. In the background, I could hear other families laughing, glasses clinking, the normal sounds of celebration continuing around us. "Perhaps this isn't the place for this discussion," my mother said, her voice low. "We're customers here, after all." The moment stretched between us. 3 years ago, I might have apologized. 2 years ago, I might have walked away. But today, I simply nodded once. "You're right. You are customers." I signaled to Marcus, who approached with a bottle of champagne. "And as the owner and executive chef of Harvest and Vine, I'd like to welcome you properly." The shock that rippled across their faces was almost worth every holiday spent in the shadow of their dismissal. Almost. "Owner?" Paige's voice had lost its smug edge. "Since when?" 2 years, I said, accepting the champagne from Marcus and beginning to pour. "Since Giorgio retired. You remember him? The chef I apprenticed under. The one you told me was a waste of my potential." My mother's face had gone slightly pale. "You never mentioned that I bought the restaurant? That I've built it into one of the most successful establishments in Greenwich? That I'm the reason you had to book your table 3 months in advance?" I finished pouring the last glass. "You never asked." Isabel's father, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, cleared his throat. "Well, congratulations. The place looks remarkable." I turned to him with a genuine smile. "Thank you. We're very proud of what we've created here." "We thought you were still at that little cafe in Stamford," my mother said, her voice strangely defensive. "You never update us on your career." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. "I sent invitations to the opening, to all of you." Fletcher at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I remember that. I meant to come, but work was crazy and—" "It's fine," I said, cutting him off. "Really, what matters is that you're here, now. And I've prepared something special for your table." I gestured to the plates before them, where the carefully arranged components of the main course awaited their attention. "This heritage turkey is from a small farm in Vermont. We've been working with them for over a year to ensure the birds are raised with care and respect. The 3 preparations highlight different aspects of the meat: the purity of the breast, the richness of the confit, the complexity of the roulade." As I described each element of the dish, I watched their expressions shift from discomfort to genuine interest. Food has that power to transcend awkwardness, to speak directly to something more primal than social tensions. The cranberry component took 17 attempts to perfect, I continued. It needed to balance acidity and sweetness in exactly the right proportion. Much like relationships, I suppose. My mother's eyes snapped to mine at that, a flicker of something. Recognition? Regret? Passing quickly across her face before her usual composed expression returned. Please enjoy while it's at the perfect temperature, I finished, stepping back. I'll return to check on you later. As I walked away, I heard Julian mutter to Paige, "Did you know about this? That this was her place?" I didn't hear her response, but I didn't need to. The answer was obvious. Back in the kitchen, Serena raised an eyebrow at me. "So, how'd it go?" I picked up a spoon and tasted a sauce simmering on the stove, considering. Exactly as expected, and completely differently at the same time. She nodded as if that made perfect sense, which perhaps to another chef, it did. Cooking was always a balance of control and surprise. You followed recipes precisely, yet ingredients had their own inherent qualities that could never be entirely predicted. People were much the same. For the next hour, I focused on service for the rest of the restaurant, circulating among tables, accepting compliments, directing the flow of courses with practiced ease. All the while, I was acutely aware of table 9, though I deliberately avoided looking in that direction. When it was time for dessert, I supervised the plating of the special I'd created for the holiday. A deconstructed pumpkin pie with spiced mascarpone, candied pecans, and a delicate tuile cookie. For my family's table, I added an extra element, a small chocolate medallion painted with edible gold, embossed with a miniature maple leaf, a nod to the tree that had stood in our backyard during my childhood, where I'd spent hours hiding with books and dreams while the rest of the family moved in their own orbits inside the house. It was a small detail they would likely miss, but it mattered to me. It was part of my story, whether they recognized it or not. As the desserts were delivered, I finally allowed myself another look at their table. They were eating, talking, occasionally laughing, a typical family gathering, at least on the surface. But I noticed the glances they cast around the restaurant, the way my mother straightened the silverware with extra precision, the way Paige kept tucking her hair behind her ear, the nervous gesture she'd had since childhood but would vehemently deny if pointed out. They were rattled. Good. When the plates were cleared and coffee served, I made my final approach. This time, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "I trust everything was satisfactory?" I asked, my professional voice firmly in place. "It was exceptional, May," Fletcher said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in years. "Truly amazing." Paige nodded, her expression uncharacteristically subdued. "The scallops were perfect and that cranberry. Gastrique, was it? I've never tasted anything like it." "High praise indeed," I said with a small smile. Coming from someone who once told me cooking was just following directions anyone could read. She had the grace to flush slightly. "I was 19 and stupid." "Yes, you were," I agreed, without heat, "though you were 27 when you repeated it at Cousin Emma's wedding." My mother cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with this direct acknowledgement of past slights. "Maeve, perhaps we could speak privately? This is hardly the venue for family discussions." I looked around the restaurant, at the tables of people enjoying the meals my team and I had prepared, at the space I had designed down to the last detail, at the world I had built while they weren't looking. "Actually, I disagree," I said calmly. "This is exactly the right venue. This is my domain, where my work speaks for itself, where it can't be diminished or overlooked." Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Listen, I don't think anyone's trying to diminish anything. The meal was extraordinary. You've clearly built something impressive here. Thank you, Julian, I said, genuinely appreciating his attempt to ease the tension. And you're right. What matters isn't the past. It's what we choose to do now. I turned back to my mother. Did you have something specific you wanted to discuss? She looked momentarily thrown by my directness, another departure from our family's tradition of talking around difficult subjects rather than addressing them head-on. We didn't know about the restaurant, she said finally. About your success here. You should have told us. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Marjorie Sullivan it was as close as one might get. I considered her words, and the hint of vulnerability behind them, so unusual from the woman who had always presented certainty as her defining characteristic. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Her eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, Isabel spoke up. For the first time. I think what everyone's trying to say is that we're all genuinely impressed and would love to know more about how you built all this, she said, gesturing around the restaurant. Fletcher's told me you were always the creative one in the family, but I had no idea the scope of your talent. I looked at her with new interest. Fletcher's fiancée was either remarkably perceptive or brilliantly strategic in her social navigation, possibly both. I made a mental note to reevaluate my initial indifference toward her. Thank you, Isabel, I said. Perhaps another time. We're still in service and I should get back to my team. She nodded, understanding. Of course, but maybe we could reschedule. A proper family gathering where you're not working? I hesitated, the reflexive refusal hovering on my lips. But something in her straightforward gaze made me reconsider. I'd like that, I said finally, surprising myself with the sincerity of the statement. As I prepared to return to the kitchen, my mother reached out and touched my wrist lightly, a rare physical gesture from a woman who had always maintained careful personal space. The maple leaf on the dessert, she said softly. From the tree in the backyard? I stared at her, momentarily speechless. She had noticed. After a lifetime of feeling invisible, that small recognition landed with unexpected force. Yes, I managed. I'm surprised you caught that. A complicated expression crossed her face. Pride, regret, something else I couldn't quite name. I see more than you think, Maeve. I just haven't always known how to say it. It wasn't a solution or a resolution. It was barely even a beginning. But as I nodded and stepped away from their table, I felt something shift. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. Like the precise moment a soufflé begins to rise, when heat and time and chemistry align to transform separate ingredients into something ew. I returned to the kitchen, where the controlled chaos of service continued unabated. Dishes to plate, problems to solve, a team to lead, the concrete realities that had become my anchor when family connections proved too tenuous to rely upon. Everything okay, Chef? Serena asked, not looking up from the delicate sugar work she was completing for a special anniversary dessert. I considered the question, its simplicity belying the complexity of any honest answer. Yes, I said finally. Everything is exactly as it should be. And in that moment, standing in the kitchen I had built, surrounded by the team I had assembled, I realized it was true, not because my family had finally recognized my worth, but because I had stopped needing them to. The rest of service passed in its usual rhythm, plates going out, compliments coming back, the dance of a well-orchestrated dining experience continuing until the last table was cleared. My family left shortly after 7, each offering varying degrees of awkward farewells. Fletcher promised to call. Paige said something about doing lunch. My mother simply squeezed my hand before departing, her eyes communicating something her words could not yet articulate. I didn't expect grand transformations. Families don't change course easily, especially ones with decades of established patterns. But perhaps recognition was a start, seeing me clearly, finally, in the world I had created for myself. After the last guests had departed and the kitchen had been restored to its pristine state, I sat alone at table 9, the best table in the house, the one I had ultimately given my family. The harbor lights twinkled through the windows, and the embers in the fireplace cast a warm glow across the empty restaurant. I poured myself a small glass of the special reserve wine we'd been saving, and considered the day, not just the unexpected collision of my separated worlds, but the deeper significance of what had transpired. They had come to my table, eaten. My food finally glimpsed the person I had become while they weren't looking. It wasn't revenge, though perhaps there had been a flicker of satisfaction in their surprise. It wasn't even really reconciliation, though something had opened that had previously been closed. It was simpler and more profound. It was being seen, on my terms, in my element, without diminishment or qualification. The wine was perfect, complex, balanced, satisfying. Like the life I had built for myself, one careful selection at a time. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned gray and damp, a fine mist hanging over the harbor as I walked to Harvest and Vine. The streets were quiet, most people still sleeping off their holiday indulgences or strategizing their Black Friday shopping campaigns. I'd left my apartment earlier than necessary, needing the solitude of an empty kitchen to process everything that had happened. Last night, after everyone had gone and I'd locked up the restaurant, I'd sat alone in the darkened dining room for nearly an hour, nursing a glass of port and replaying every expression, every word, every moment of surprise from my family's unexpected visit. The memory of their faces when I'd revealed myself as the owner and chef still brought a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a lingering sadness that it had taken this chance encounter for them to see me at all. I unlocked the side entrance and stepped into the kitchen, not bothering with the lights yet. The familiar scents welcomed me, hints of yesterday's herbs and spices, the underlying notes of good olive oil and aged wood. I ran my hand along the cool, stainless, steel countertop, grounding myself in the tangible reality of what I'd built. The restaurant wouldn't open until dinner service. We always closed for lunch the day after Thanksgiving to give the staff a partial break. But there was prep work to be done, inventories to check, and special orders to place for the weekend. More importantly, I needed this quiet communion with my space before facing whatever came next. I had just finished making coffee when my phone buzzed. Fletcher. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said, trying for neutral. "May." His voice sounded different, less assured perhaps than his usual confident tone. "Did I wake you?" "No, I'm at the restaurant. We're closed for lunch, but I'm prepping for dinner." "Right, of course." An awkward pause. "Listen, about yesterday." I waited, unwilling to fill the silence to make this easier for him. It had always been our family pattern. Uncomfortable moments smoothed over. Real conversations deflected with pleasantries or simply avoided altogether. Not this time. "I didn't know," he finally said. "About the restaurant, about what you've accomplished. I should have known." I leaned against the counter, cradling my coffee mug. "Yes, you should have." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost see him running a hand through his hair, the way he did when thrown off balance. "Can we talk? Not on the phone. Maybe coffee or something." Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect the fragile sense of equilibrium I'd established. But there was something in his voice, a note of genuine regret, perhaps, that gave me pause. "I have meetings with suppliers most of today. Tomorrow morning, there's a place called Bluebird Coffee about 2 blocks from the restaurant. 10 o'clock? "I'll be there," he said quickly, as if afraid I might rescind the offer. "And May? What?" "You've built. It's really something extraordinary." After we hung up, I stood motionless in the kitchen, trying to identify the emotion coursing through me. It wasn't quite hope. I was too cautious for that. But perhaps a willingness to listen, to see if there was anything worth salvaging from the ruins of our siblinghood. The back door opened and Serena walked in, wrapped in a chunky knit scarf, cheeks pink from the cold. "Morning, Chef. You're here early." I raised my coffee cup in greeting. Couldn't sleep. Thought I might as well be productive. She hung her coat on the rack and tied her apron with practiced efficiency. "Thinking about yesterday? With your family?" News traveled fast in a restaurant kitchen. No doubt the entire staff had pieced together the drama by the end of service. "Among other things," I admitted. "I'm meeting my brother for coffee tomorrow." Serena raised an eyebrow but didn't comment directly. Instead, she changed the subject. "I've been thinking about that new winter menu we discussed. What if we did something with the black truffles Paolo offered last week? A simple risotto, maybe, but elevated with truffle and that aged pecorino from the cheesemaker in Vermont?" And just like that, we were back on familiar ground. This was another thing I valued about my team. They understood when to push and when to pivot, the delicate dance of supporting without intruding. As we discussed menu plans, the kitchen gradually came to life around us. Marcus arrived with fresh flowers for the dining room, followed by the dishwasher and prep cooks. By noon, I had almost managed to push thoughts of my family to the background. Almost, but not entirely. As I tasted a new sauce Serena was developing, my phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Your restaurant is lovely. We should discuss it properly. Sunday lunch at the house? One sao." Not a question typically, but a statement of what would happen. I stared at the screen, torn between familiar irritation at her presumption and a reluctant appreciation for the effort, however awkwardly expressed. A second text followed. "Please bring that cranberry element. Your father would enjoy it." That addition, so uncharacteristic of my mother with her aversion to explicitly requesting anything, tipped the balance. I typed back, "I'll be there." With cranberry gastrique. Then after a moment's hesitation, added, "Thank you for asking." The rest of the day passed in a blur of productive work. Inventory checks, staff scheduling for the busy holiday season, a long call with our wine distributor about securing a rare allocation for New Year's Eve. By the time dinner service began, I felt more centered, the familiar rhythm of the kitchen providing the stability I needed. As I placed the final garnish on a plate and watched it leave the pass, I couldn't help but reflect on how different this felt from the previous day's service. Yesterday, every movement had been weighted with anticipation, with the knowledge that my family would be evaluating my food, my restaurant, my life's work, even if they didn't yet know it was mine. Today, each plate was simply an expression of my craft, unburdened by familial expectations or the need for recognition. But, as service wound down and the last guest departed, I found myself wondering if that was entirely true. Had I really been cooking for myself all these years? Or had some part of me always been performing for an absent audience, seeking validation from people who weren't even watching? The thought unsettled me as I walked home through the now drizzling rain. My collar turned up against the chill. My apartment felt emptier than usual, the silence after the constant noise of the kitchen more noticeable. I poured a glass of wine and curled up on my window seat, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass, distorting the harbor lights beyond. Tomorrow, I would see Fletcher. Sunday, my mother and father. After years of careful distance, of building a life separate from their expectations and judgments, I was voluntarily stepping back into their orbit. The question was, would I be able to maintain my own gravitational pull? Or would I fall back into old patterns, becoming a satellite to their sun? Bluebird Coffee was already busy when I arrived the next morning, filled with the Saturday crowd of young families and people tapping on laptops. I spotted Fletcher immediately. He'd always been easy to find in a crowd, his height and the particular way he occupied space making him conspicuous, even in a room full of people. He stood when he saw me, awkwardly half raising his hand in greeting. He'd already claimed a small table by the window and had 2 cups waiting. "I got you a latte," he said as I approached. "You still take them, right?" The fact that he remembered such a small detail surprised me. "Yes, thank you." I slid into the chair across from him, unwinding my scarf. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the ambient cafe noise filling the space between us. "You look good, May," he finally said. "Really good. Running your own place. Clearly agrees with you." I took a sip of the latte, which was actually quite decent. It's challenging, but yes, I love it. The hours are insane, but when you're building something that's truly yours, I get that. Or at least I think I do. He rotated his cup slowly. "Listen, I owe you an apology. Several, probably. But especially for yesterday. That look on your face when Mom said she picked somewhere neutral." I shook my head. "It's fine, Fletcher. You didn't know." "That's just it. I should have known. I should have known about the restaurant, about how successful you've become. I should have made more of an effort to be part of your life." He ran a hand through his hair just as I'd imagined he would. "After Dad's heart scare last year, I've been thinking a lot about family, about connections, and I realized I've let too many slip away. The mention of our father's health made me sit up straighter." "Is he okay? Mom didn't mention anything yesterday." Fletcher waved a hand dismissively. "He's fine now. Stubborn as ever. He's on medication and supposedly watching his diet, though I caught him sneaking bacon at breakfast today." He paused. He regretted not being there yesterday. At the restaurant. He had a business dinner he couldn't reschedule. I absorbed this information, trying to imagine my father, a man who had always been more presence than participant in my life, expressing regret over missing my moment of revelation. It didn't quite compute. Dad never seemed particularly interested. "In my career?" I said carefully. Fletcher looked down at his coffee. "I don't think it's that he wasn't interested. He just didn't know how to connect with you. With any of us, really, but especially you. You were always so self-sufficient, even as a kid. You never seemed to need anyone." I nearly laughed at the absurdity of this assessment. I wasn't self-sufficient, Fletcher. I was invisible. There's a difference. He winced. "I never thought of it that way." "No, you wouldn't have. You were the golden boy, Paige was the perfect daughter, and I was." I trailed off, not wanting to fall into self-pity. "Anyway, it doesn't matter now. I've built my own life, on my terms." "It does matter," he insisted, "because we missed it. We missed you becoming this force. This incredibly talented chef who creates experiences people will remember for years. Do you know what Isabel said after we left yesterday? She said it was the most meaningful meal she'd ever had. That she could feel the intention behind every element." Something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. Professional accolades were one thing, the positive reviews, the industry recognition. But hearing that my soon-to-be sister-in-law had genuinely understood what I was trying to accomplish with my food felt different, more personal somehow. "Isabel seems insightful," I said. Fletcher smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "She is. That's why I'm marrying her. She sees things, people, clearly. More clearly than I do, usually." He hesitated. "She's been asking about you since we got engaged. Wanted to know what you were like, what you enjoyed. I realized I didn't have good answers, and that bothered me more than I expected." I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. "You're getting married in March, right? At the Hawthorne Hotel?" He nodded. "March 15th. Mom's in full planning mode, as you can imagine. I got the save the date, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was actually expected to attend or if it was just sent out of obligation. Fletcher's face fell. Of course we want you there. I want you there. In fact, he took a deep breath. I was hoping you might consider catering the rehearsal dinner. I blinked in surprise. You want me to cater your rehearsal dinner? Me personally or my restaurant? Both. You, your team, whatever would work. He leaned forward, suddenly earnest. May, I've eaten at some of the best restaurants in the country. Nothing compares to what you created yesterday. That meal told a story, our story in a way, but reimagined into something beautiful. I can't think of a better way to start our wedding weekend than with your food. I sat back, genuinely stunned by the request. I don't know, Fletcher. That's a big ask. We're booked months in advance, and the logistics of off-site catering are complicated. I understand that, and if it's not possible, I get it. But would you at least think about it? It would mean a lot to me, to us. There was a new quality in his voice, a vulnerability I wasn't accustomed to hearing from my confident older brother. It made him seem more human somehow, less the mythic figure who had always seemed to coast through life on charm and natural ability. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. He nodded, accepting this limited commitment. Fair enough. He drained the last of his coffee. So, are you going to Mom's tomorrow? She mentioned she'd invited you. I said I would, with some of my cranberry gastrique, apparently. He laughed. Dad couldn't stop talking about it, said it was the best thing he'd tasted in years. We fell into easier conversation then, catching up on the basics of each other's lives, his work at the investment firm, my challenges and triumphs with the restaurant, mutual acquaintances and old neighborhood news. It wasn't deep connection, not yet, but it was something. A tentative bridge being built over years of distance. As we prepared to leave, Fletcher hesitated, then pulled me into an unexpected hug. I'm proud of you, May. I should have said that yesterday. I'm really, really proud of what you've created. I stood stiffly for a moment, then allowed myself to return the embrace briefly. Thanks, Fletcher. That means more than I expected it would. We parted on the sidewalk outside the cafe, promising to see each other the following day at our parents' house. As I walked back toward my apartment, I felt oddly lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. Not disappeared entirely, but redistributed into something more manageable. Sunday arrived with clear, cold sunshine, the kind of crisp, late autumn day that makes New England famous in travel brochures. I spent the morning in my kitchen at home, carefully preparing a batch of the cranberry gastrique that had apparently made such an impression on my father. The process was meditative, the precise balance of sugar and vinegar, the slow reduction, the infusion of spices, all requiring attention to timing and temperature. As I worked, I thought about the conversation with Fletcher, about the unexpected request to cater his rehearsal dinner. Part of me was wary, seeing it as potential validation. Finally, my family acknowledging my talent, while another part recognized the genuine appreciation in his request. Was it possible to accept the recognition without becoming dependent on it? To share my gift without tying my worth to their reaction? By noon, the gastrique was cooling in a small glass bottle, ready to be transported. I changed into a simple but elegant outfit, charcoal wool trousers, a soft cream sweater, low-heeled boots that were both stylish and comfortable. Professional but not stiff, approachable but not casual. I was dressing for myself, I told myself, but I couldn't deny the care I took with my appearance. The drive to my parents' house took 25 minutes, winding through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until I reached the tree-lined street where I'd grown up. The Sullivan home was a stately colonial with black shutters and a glossy red door, set back from the road on a meticulously landscaped acre. As I pulled into the circular driveway, memories flooded back. Bicycle races with neighborhood kids, waiting for the school bus in winter darkness, the summer I'd planted an garden that my mother had later removed because it disrupted the landscape design. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. Then I took a deep breath, grabbed the bottle of gastrique, and walked to the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal my father. Edward Sullivan looked much the same as he always had, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding presence that drew attention in boardrooms. His hair had gone fully silver now, but his eyes were the same clear blue that I'd inherited, along with his stubborn chin. What was different was his expression, uncertain, almost tentative as he stood in the doorway. "Maeve," he said, my name sounding strange in his formal baritone. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, stepping inside as he moved back. "Yes, well." He cleared his throat. "Your mother's in the kitchen. She insisted on cooking herself. Today, wouldn't even let Mrs. Henderson help." This was unexpected. My mother, Marjorie Sullivan, hadn't personally prepared a meal in years, not since they'd hired a housekeeper who doubled as a cook for family dinners. "She's cooking?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. A ghost of a smile crossed my father's face. Attempting to, at any rate. It's been interesting to witness. He led me through the familiar hallway, past the formal living room, where no one ever sat, and the dining room used only for special occasions. The house smelled different than I remembered, less like furniture polish and scented candles, more like actual food. Onions, herbs, something baking. We entered the kitchen to find my mother standing at the island, reading glasses perched on her nose, frowning at an open cookbook. Her normally perfect silver-streaked hair was slightly mussed, and she wore an apron over her usual elegant slacks and blouse. At her elbow was a glass of white wine, already half empty. "Marjorie," my father announced, "Maeve is here." She looked up, startled, then quickly removed her glasses. "Maeve, I didn't hear you arrive." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "You're early." "Only by 5 minutes," I said, placing the bottle of gastrique on the counter. "I brought this, as requested." My mother eyed the bottle, then looked back at me. "Thank you. I'm making roast chicken. Or trying to." The recipe seemed straightforward enough, but I think the oven temperature might be off. I suppressed a smile. "Would you like some help?" A brief internal struggle played across her features, pride warring with practicality. Practicality? 1. Perhaps you could check the potatoes. They're supposed to be roasting, but they seem to be not doing that. I moved to the oven and opened it, releasing a cloud of steam, but very little of the caramelized aroma that properly roasting potatoes should produce. A quick glance confirmed my suspicion. "They need higher heat, and you've got them in too small a pan. They're steaming instead of roasting." I looked around the kitchen. "Do you have a larger baking sheet?" For the next 20 minutes, I quietly adjusted various elements of her planned meal, increasing the oven temperature, spreading the potatoes on a larger tray, suggesting she add more salt to the green beans, showing her how to properly check if the chicken was done. She watched attentively, occasionally asking questions with an earnestness I'd never seen from her before. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked, as I demonstrated how to make a simple pan sauce with the chicken drippings. "Culinary school, I suppose, but you seem to just know instinctively." I stirred the sauce, considering my answer. Some of it is training, yes, but a lot is just practice, paying attention, learning from mistakes. I glanced at her. "I've been cooking since I was 12, Mom. You just never noticed." She was quiet for a moment, focused on slicing bread. "I noticed more than you think," she said finally. "I just didn't know how to engage with it, with you." Before I could respond to this surprising admission, the front door opened and Fletcher's voice called out, "Hello, something smells amazing." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, Isabel beside him. They both looked windblown and cheerful, clearly having enjoyed the beautiful day. "May!" Isabel stepped forward immediately, giving me a warm hug as if we were already close friends. "I'm so glad you're here. I've been thinking about that meal constantly. The way you balanced every flavor, the presentation, it was like eating art." Her genuine enthusiasm was disarming. "Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it." "Enjoyed is an understatement," Fletcher said, moving to kiss our mother's cheek. "Looks like you've been busy, Mom. Need any help setting the table?" As Fletcher and Isabel busied themselves with place settings and my father opened wine, I found myself observing this familiar scene with new eyes. The Sullivan family Sunday lunch, a tradition I had participated in hundreds of times before gradually drifting away. It was all so recognizable, yet subtly altered. My mother actually cooking, my father watching me with something like newfound respect. Fletcher and his fiancée moving in tandem, comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of genuine partnership rather than social advantage. And me, no longer the afterthought daughter desperate for acknowledgement, but a successful chef whose opinion on roasting potatoes was suddenly valuable. When we finally sat down to eat, my mother surprised me again by gesturing for me to take the seat at the head of the table, my father's traditional place. "You should do the honors today," she said simply. I hesitated, then took the offered seat. My father settled at the opposite end, seemingly unbothered by the change. Fletcher and Isabel sat on one side, my mother on the other. The food was arranged family style in the center, nothing like the elegant plating at my restaurant, but somehow more meaningful for its homespun quality. "Before we begin," my father said, raising his wine glass, "I'd like to propose a toast. To Maeve, whose talent has clearly been wasted on us for far too long, and to new beginnings." The others raised their glasses, murmuring agreement. I felt something catch in my throat as I lifted my own glass in acknowledgement. "And to Mom," I added, for being brave enough to try something new. A look of genuine pleasure crossed my mother's face. Not the polite social smile I was accustomed to, but something more vulnerable and real. As we began to eat, the conversation flowed more easily than I could ever remember at this table. Isabel asked thoughtful questions about my culinary training. Fletcher shared amusing stories from their recent vacation. And even my father contributed beyond his usual monosyllabic comments about work. Halfway through the meal, my mother spooned some of the cranberry gastrique onto her plate and tasted it carefully. "This is remarkable, Maeve. Would you mind explaining how you make it? Not that I could replicate it, but I'm curious about the process." As I described the technique, watching her nod with genuine interest, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, but significantly. For the first time in my memory, my family was seeing me, not as an extension of themselves, not as a disappointment or an afterthought, but as myself, as Maeve. And perhaps more importantly, I was seeing them differently too. Not as the monolithic force that had shaped my insecurities, but as individual people with their own limitations and capacities for growth. My mother's awkward attempts at connection, my father's quiet pride, Fletcher's genuine remorse. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But as we finished lunch and moved to the living room for coffee, I felt a cautious optimism taking root alongside my hard-won independence. December arrived with a flurry of activity at Harvest and Vine. The restaurant was booked solid for holiday parties, gift cards were selling at triple the normal rate, and every supplier seemed to be running behind schedule. I thrived on the controlled chaos, the constant problem-solving, the satisfaction of watching my vision executed night after night. But beneath the professional composure, I was navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. The Sunday lunch at my parents' house had left me unsettled in ways I hadn't anticipated. After years of defining myself in opposition to my family, the rebel, the misfit, the one who didn't belong, I found myself reluctantly considering that perhaps people could change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but incrementally. My mother's awkward attempts at cooking, my father's toast, Fletcher's genuine remorse. "Chef, the Andersons are asking about New Year's Eve reservations again," Marcus said, interrupting my thoughts as I finalized the December menu. "I've told them we're completely booked, but Mrs. Anderson insists that you might make an exception." I smiled, returning to the present moment. "The Andersons have been coming here since our first week. Tell them we'll find space." He raised an eyebrow. "We're already overbooked by 4 tables. Then we'll be overbooked by 5. Some problems are worth having." I handed him the finalized menu. "What do you think about the winter squash ravioli with brown butter and sage? Too predictable? With the preserved lemon and pine nut gremolata? Not predictable at all." He scanned the rest of the menu. "This is solid, though I'm surprised you're bringing back the scallop dish after." He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. After serving it to my family on Thanksgiving, I had deliberately included it, a small act of reclamation. That dish was one of my signatures, and I refused to let its association with that day diminish its place on my menu. "It's one of our best sellers," I said simply. "Besides, I've tweaked the butternut component." Marcus nodded, understanding, without needing further explanation. That was one of the things I valued most about my staff, their intuitive grasp of the unspoken. In many ways, they knew me better than my blood relatives ever had, or at least better than my family had known. Me until now, the past 2 weeks had brought a strange new dynamic into my life. Tentative text messages from my mother about recipes, an email from my father with an article about a new agricultural initiative he thought might interest me, and regular updates from Fletcher about wedding plans. Small gestures, unremarkable perhaps to anyone with a normal family relationship, but seismic in the context of our history. I hadn't yet given Fletcher an answer about catering his rehearsal dinner. The practical obstacles were significant. We were booked for a large event the same night, staffing would be challenging, and the logistics of transporting everything to the venue would require careful planning. But the real hesitation lay deeper. Was I ready to intertwine my professional identity with my family role? To risk the sanctuary I'd built becoming another arena for old dynamics to reassert themselves? My phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. "Cake tasting tomorrow at 3. Would love your expert opinion if you're free. No pressure." I had come to genuinely like Fletcher's fiancée over the past weeks. She possessed a directness that was refreshing after a lifetime of Sullivan circumlocution. When she asked a question, she actually wanted the answer, not just confirmation of what she already believed. And she seemed to value my professional expertise without the undercurrent of surprise that characterized my family's newfound respect. I texted back, "Can't make 3. How about 4:30? I can meet you at the bakery." Her response was immediate. "Perfect. Camille's Patisserie on Elm. Fletcher has a meeting, so it's just us girls. Thank you." I set down my phone, mulling over this development, spending time with my future sister-in-law, weighing in on wedding decisions. These were normal family activities, the kind I had long ago resigned myself to observing from the periphery. Being invited into the center felt both gratifying and slightly disorienting, like stepping onto solid ground after years at sea. The rest of the day passed in a blur of vendor calls, staff meetings, and menu preparations. By the time evening service began, I had pushed personal considerations aside to focus entirely on the work before me. This had always been my sanctuary. The precise movements, the sensory feedback, the immediate problems requiring immediate solutions. Here, I knew exactly who I was and what was expected of me. The following afternoon, I arrived at Camille's patisserie precisely at 4:30, having changed from my chef's whites into a simple black sweater and tailored pants. Through the window, I could see Isabel already seated at a table near the back, her dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, scrolling through something on her phone. She looked up as I entered, her face brightening. "Maeve, thank you so much for coming." She stood to give me a quick hug, then gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Camille is bringing out the samples in a minute. I'm completely overwhelmed by all the options." I settled into the chair, taking in the charming little bakery with its white marble countertops and gleaming display cases. "Happy to help, though I should warn you, I'm brutally honest about pastry." She laughed. "That's exactly why I wanted you here. Everyone else just says everything is delicious. I need someone with actual standards." "The Sullivan family isn't known for holding back opinions," I said dryly. "True, but most of those opinions are about people, not cake." Her expression turned more serious. "And I've noticed they're particularly opinionated about people who challenge their worldview, like you." Before I could respond to this surprisingly insightful observation, a slender woman with a sleek bob approached our table, carrying a tray lined with small plates. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Camille. I've selected our most popular wedding cake samples based on your initial preferences." She set the tray between us with a flourish. From left to right, vanilla bean with raspberry filling and white chocolate buttercream, lemon with blueberry compote and cream cheese frosting, chocolate hazelnut with espresso ganache, and coconut with passion fruit curd and meringue buttercream. Isabel thanked her, then looked at me with a hint of mischief. "I deliberately didn't tell her who you are. I wanted her honest best, not her, oh my god, the executive chef from Harvest and Vine panic special." I appreciated the consideration. Smart thinking. Shall we? We tasted each sample methodically, discussing texture, flavor balance, structural integrity, and visual appeal. I found myself slipping naturally into mentor mode, explaining why the acidity of the passion fruit balanced the sweetness of the coconut, how the espresso deepened the chocolate notes without overwhelming them. "You're amazing at this," Isabel said, watching me carefully dissect the interplay of flavors in the lemon cake. "Did you ever consider focusing on pastry specifically?" I shook my head. "I love the precision of pastry, but I need the full range. Sweet, savory, everything in between. I like building complete experiences." "That makes sense, given your restaurant." She set down her fork, having clearly made a decision. "The lemon with blueberry is the winner, I think. Classic but not boring, and it works for a March wedding when we're all desperate for spring." "Good choice. The texture is perfect, and the flavor balance is sophisticated without being alienating. Even your conservative great-aunt Harriet will enjoy it." She laughed. "You've been talking to Fletcher about the guest list, I see." "He mentioned there are some traditional elements in the family to consider." "That's one way to put it." She took a sip of her tea. "Can I ask you something, Maeve, about the catering for the rehearsal dinner?" I tensed slightly. "Fletcher told you he asked me?" "Of course. We don't keep secrets." She leaned forward. "Look, I understand if it's too complicated logistically, but I want you to know that it wasn't his parents' idea, or some gesture of obligation. It was his idea, and I fully supported it because your food is extraordinary, and because—" She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Because I think it matters, symbolically, to have you be part of creating the weekend. Not just attending as a guest, but contributing your gift, making your mark." Her perception startled me. This woman I barely knew had articulated something. I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself that my hesitation stemmed partly from fear that this invitation was another form of familial obligation rather than genuine appreciation of my work. "That's perceptive," I said finally. She shrugged. I'm good at reading people. It's why I'm effective at my job. Isabel was a corporate mediator, I recalled, specializing in resolving conflicts within family-owned businesses. Suddenly, her comfort navigating Sullivan family dynamics made more sense. The logistics are challenging, I admitted. We're booked for a large event that night, and serving off-site requires careful planning. I understand completely. Just know that the invitation comes from genuine admiration, not obligation. She smiled. And selfishly, I want all our guests to experience what I did at Thanksgiving. That moment of realizing this isn't just food, it's storytelling. I felt something shift inside me at her words. Perhaps there was a way to approach this that maintained my boundaries while allowing for new possibilities. Let me think about some creative solutions. Maybe we could do a partial catering or a signature course. Whatever works for you, no pressure. She gathered her belongings. I should let Camille know about our choice. Thank you again for coming. Your expertise was invaluable. As we parted outside the bakery, she gave me another quick hug. See you Sunday? Your mom mentioned you might come for dinner. I'm still not sure. The restaurant is chaotic this time of year. She nodded, understanding. Just know you're genuinely wanted there. By all of us. I walked back to my car pondering her words. Genuinely wanted. Such a simple concept, yet so foreign in my experience of family. For most of my life, I had felt tolerated at best, an obligation to be managed. The idea that my presence might be actively desired, my contributions valued, still felt like unfamiliar territory. Later that evening, as service wound down and the final tables lingered over dessert and coffee, I found myself in a quiet corner of the kitchen, sketching ideas for a potential rehearsal dinner menu. Not committing, just exploring, creating, a concept that would showcase my strengths while being practical to execute off-site with limited staff. Working on something new, chef? Serena appeared at my elbow, curious as always. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Possibly catering my brother's rehearsal dinner in March. Just playing with ideas at this point. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. That's new territory. Indeed. She studied my sketches, head tilted thoughtfully. Interesting direction. More personal than our usual style. It's family, I said simply. Different context. Serena nodded, understanding the layers in that simple statement. I think it's good. You bringing your work to them, on your terms, reclaiming the narrative. I looked at her sharply. For someone so young, she occasionally displayed remarkable insight. Something like that. Well, if you decide to do it, the team will support you, and... She smiled slightly. I make a killer portable sous vide. Set up for off-site events. Just saying. As she walked away, I felt a wave of gratitude for this found family I had created around me. People who saw me clearly, who valued not just what I could do, but who I was. Perhaps that was the key to navigating this new chapter with my blood. Relations, remembering that I no longer approach them from a place of need, but from a position of fullness. The Sunday dinner at my parents' house became a reality before I had fully decided whether to attend. A series of small decisions, checking the staff schedule to confirm Marcus could handle the evening, responding to my mother's text about dietary restrictions, none, selecting a bottle of wine to bring, culminated in me standing once again on their doorstep, feeling like both an insider and an outsider simultaneously. This time, it was my mother who opened the door, her usual perfect appearance slightly softened. She had traded her typical structured clothing for a simple cashmere sweater, and her hair was looser than her standard helmet of sprayed perfection. Maeve, you're here. The relief in her voice was unmistakable, as if she had genuinely feared I might not come. Thank you for fitting us into your busy schedule. The phrasing might once have struck me as passive-aggressive, but today I chose to hear it as sincere acknowledgement of my professional commitments. The restaurant runs smoothly without me occasionally. That's the mark of a good team. She nodded, accepting this explanation as she led me inside. Your father is obsessing over the wine selection. He's been researching what pairs best with braised short ribs for days. This detail surprised me. My father had always been a Scotchman, approaching wine with the detached obligation of someone who knew it was expected at his social level, but didn't particularly care about the subtleties. He's been researching wine pairings? My mother's smile held a hint of fond exasperation. Ever since Thanksgiving, he's developed a sudden intense interest in gastronomy. He's subscribed to 3 food magazines and has been watching cooking shows in the evening. Last week, he attempted to make risotto. It was educational. I tried to picture my father, the stern corporate executive who had always delegated domestic matters to others, standing over a pot of arborio rice, patiently stirring. The image simply wouldn't form. That's unexpected, I managed. Many things have been unexpected lately, she replied with a meaningful look. Before she could elaborate, we reached the kitchen, where my father was indeed studying 2 bottles of red wine with uncharacteristic concentration. He looked up as we entered. Maeve, perfect timing. Which do you think would better complement braised short ribs? This Barolo or the Chateauneuf du Pape? I blinked at this greeting, so different from our usual stilted exchanges. The Barolo would be traditional, but personally, I'd go with the Chateauneuf. The blend of varietals will stand up to the richness without overwhelming the more subtle flavors. He nodded, pleased with this assessment. That was my instinct as well. Your mother thought I was overthinking it. I said no such thing, she protested mildly. I merely suggested that Maeve might have more pressing topics to discuss than wine selection. Few topics are more pressing than proper wine pairing, I found myself saying, the hint of humor in my voice surprising me as much as them. Though I brought a bottle as well, a small production Syrah from a vineyard in the Hudson Valley. The winemaker is doing interesting things with sustainability. My father accepted the bottle with genuine interest, examining the label. I'm not familiar with this producer. Tell me about their approach. And so I found myself explaining biodynamic viticulture to Maeve Sullivan, a man who had once dismissed my interest in food sustainability as expensive environmentalist nonsense. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about soil management and fermentation techniques. This was not the distracted, perfunctory attention he had given my academic achievements or career milestones in the past, but genuine engagement with a subject he was newly discovering. The kitchen timer went off, and my mother moved to check whatever was in the oven. That will be the focaccia. I found the recipe in that Italian cookbook you mentioned in your interview with Food and Wine last year. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. You read that interview? She looked slightly embarrassed. I've read all your interviews, Maeve. I keep a file. A file, I repeated, trying to process this information. Yes, well. She busied herself with potholders. It seemed important to have a record. Before I could respond to this revelation, the doorbell rang, signaling Fletcher and Isabel's arrival. The moment of unguarded honesty passed as we shifted into social mode, exchanging greetings and moving to the living room for appetizers. Yet something fundamental had been revealed in that brief exchange. My mother hadn't been as oblivious to my career as I had assumed. She had been paying attention, collecting evidence of my professional life, even if she hadn't known how to engage with it directly. As we settled around the coffee table, I observed my family with new eyes. Fletcher, animated as he described a challenging client situation to our father. Isabel, complimenting my mother on the arrangement of antipasti while subtly rearranging the cushions on the sofa to create a more conversational setting. My mother, watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression a complicated mix of pride and something that might have been regret. My father, pouring wine with careful attention to equal measures, a small but significant departure from his usual careless splashes. They were trying, each in their own way. The realization was both warming and disorienting. For so long I had built my identity around being the family outlier, the one who didn't fit, whose passions and choices were misunderstood or dismissed. If they were making space for me now, acknowledging the validity of my path, what did that mean for the narrative I had constructed? "Maeve, Isabel mentioned you helped with the cake selection," my mother said, interrupting my thoughts. "What did you think of Camille's work? We used her for the hospital charity gala last spring." "Her technique is solid," I replied, shifting into professional assessment mode. "Good understanding of flavor balance, though her buttercream could be lighter. The lemon cake with blueberry was the clear winner." "I'm relieved to hear you say that," Fletcher chimed in. "When Isabel texted me your choice, I was worried you were just being diplomatic. Lemon and blueberry sound so simple." "Simple isn't a criticism," I pointed out. "Some of the best dishes are simple combinations executed perfectly. Complexity, for its own sake, is often just insecurity masquerading as sophistication." "Couldn't the same be said for simplicity?" my father asked unexpectedly. "Isn't there a risk of hiding behind minimalism to avoid the challenge of nuance?" I looked at him with newfound respect. It was a thoughtful question, one that reflected actual engagement with aesthetic principles rather than dismissal. "Absolutely. The key is intention. Are you choosing simplicity because it best serves the ingredients and the experience, or because you're afraid of failing at something more ambitious? Rather like life choices in general," he mused, swirling his wine. "The wisdom lies in knowing which path represents authentic self-expression versus which is simply avoidance." The conversation had suddenly veered into philosophical territory. That would have been unimaginable at our family gatherings of the past, which typically centered on neighborhood gossip, Fletcher's accomplishments, or my father's business anecdotes. I caught Isabel's eye, and she gave me a small, encouraging smile, as if to say, "See? Things can change." Dinner itself was a revelation. My mother had clearly spent hours preparing the braised short ribs, which were tender and flavorful despite being slightly underseasoned. The polenta was creamy, the roasted vegetables caramelized just to the edge of sweetness. It wasn't restaurant-quality cooking, but it represented genuine effort and care, qualities I had rarely associated with Marjorie Sullivan's approach to family meals. "This is delicious, Mom," I said sincerely. "The braise is perfect." She colored slightly at the praise. I followed Ina Garten's recipe, with a few modifications based on what I remembered from watching you cook last time. Though I'm sure it's nothing compared to what you create at the restaurant. "Different contexts, different goals," I said. "This is exactly what a Sunday family dinner should be." My use of the word family didn't escape her notice. Her eyes met mine briefly, a flash of vulnerability in them before she looked away. "Speaking of the restaurant," my father said, "I was thinking of bringing some clients there next week. Thompson and his team from the Boston office. Would Thursday work? I know you're busy with holiday bookings." The casual way he referenced my professionally busy season, acknowledging it as legitimate rather than an inconvenience to his plans, struck me as significant. "Thursday would be fine," I replied. "I'll have Marcus reserve the private dining room. Just let me know any dietary restrictions." "Excellent," he nodded decisively. "They're important clients, and I want to impress them. Your food will do that handily." It was perhaps the most straightforward compliment my father had ever given. Me, delivered with the matter-of-fact confidence he typically reserved for business assessments. Somehow, this no-nonsense acknowledgement of my professional excellence meant more than any effusive praise might have. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally than I could ever remember at a Sullivan family gathering. We discussed books, films, current events, not just in the superficial way of people filling social obligation, but with genuine interest in each other's perspectives. Fletcher shared stories from his work that revealed more vulnerability than his usual success narratives. My mother asked thoughtful questions about sustainable food sourcing that showed she had been researching the topic. My father, most surprisingly, solicited my opinion on a potential investment in an agricultural technology startup. Throughout it all, Isabel acted as a subtle facilitator, drawing out connections between our disparate interests, gently redirecting when old tensions threatened to surface. I understood why Fletcher had chosen her, and felt a surge of gratitude for her presence in our family ecosystem. By the time dessert was served, a simple but elegant panna cotta that my mother admitted she had purchased from an Italian market, rather than attempting herself, a new pattern seemed to be establishing itself. Not perfect, not without the occasional reversion to old dynamics, but markedly different from the family interactions of my past. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that tempts New Englanders into premature optimism before the inevitable final snow. The trees along Greenwich Harbor remained bare, but crocuses had begun pushing through the soil in protected corners, small bursts of purple and yellow against the winter-brown earth. I noticed them on my morning walks to Harvest and Vine, these persistent harbingers of change. The restaurant had settled back into its normal rhythm after the holiday rush. We'd just received word that we'd been nominated for a James Beard Award, a professional milestone I'd dreamed of, but never quite expected to reach so quickly. The staff had celebrated with champagne after service, their pride in our collective, achievement warming me more than the accolades themselves. But today wasn't about Harvest and Vine. Today was Fletcher and Isabel's rehearsal dinner, and in less than 4 hours, I would be serving the most important meal of my career. Not because of critics or industry recognition, but because it represented a choice I had made. A step toward my family, on my terms. After weeks of planning, I had found a solution that honored both my professional commitments and Fletcher's request. We would handle both events, the large corporate booking at the Izachi restaurant and the off-site rehearsal dinner, by splitting my core team. Marcus would manage the restaurant with half the staff, while I would take Serena and 3 others to create a more intimate experience at the Hawthorne Hotel. "Everything's packed and ready to go, Chef," Serena reported, checking the last specialized container. "The sous vide bath is maintaining perfect temperature, and I've triple-checked the timing for each course." I nodded, reviewing the menu one final time. I had designed it as a narrative, not of past grievances or missed connections, but of potential. Each dish represented an element of who we were becoming as a family, rather than who we had been. "The Hawthorne's kitchen staff confirmed they've prepped everything according to your specifications," Serena continued. Their head chef seemed a little intimidated but cooperative. I smiled slightly. He trained under Giorgio around the same time I did. He knows what to expect. The drive to the Hawthorne Hotel took exactly 23 minutes, enough time to mentally review each step of service while the spring sunshine slanted through the windshield. The venue was one of Greenwich's oldest luxury hotels, recently renovated to blend historic charm with contemporary elegance. The rehearsal dinner would be held in their garden room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured grounds just beginning to show signs of life. When I arrived, Fletcher was already there, looking simultaneously excited and anxious, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager preparing for his first formal dance. He spotted me immediately as I directed my team through the service entrance. "May." He hurried over, relief evident in his expression. "Everything okay? On schedule?" "Perfectly," I assured him. "How was the rehearsal?" "Good. Great, actually." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar again over the past months. "Isabel is so calm about everything. Makes me look like the nervous wreck I apparently am." I smiled. "Good match, then. You've always needed someone to balance your Sullivan intensity." He laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Speaking of Sullivans, Mom and Dad just arrived. Dad's been telling everyone who'll listen that his daughter is the executive chef tonight. I think he's actually bragging, May. Never thought I'd see the day. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in my chest. Not vindication exactly, but a quiet satisfaction that felt healthier than the old resentments I'd carried for so long. They're still finding their way with this, same as we all are, I said. I should check on setup. Guests arriving at 6:30? He nodded. 38 people total, mostly family and wedding party. Perfect, we're ready. The next 2 hours passed in focused preparation, final plating details discussed with my team, wine service coordinated with the Hawthorne staff, last-minute adjustments to accommodate the preferences of key family members. My mother's mild shellfish allergy, my father's aversion to overly sweet desserts, Aunt Judith's gluten sensitivity, all factored into my planning with a level of attention I once would have resented giving but now found myself offering willingly. By the time guests began to arrive, the kitchen was running with the precision of a Swiss watch. I observed from the pass, making minute adjustments to each plate before it left my sight. The first course, a delicate spring pea velouté with mint oil and cured lemon, was being served when Isabel slipped into the kitchen. Maeve? She approached cautiously, aware she was entering my domain. I know you're busy, but I wanted to say thank you. This means more than you know. She looked radiant in a simple cream dress, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo, her expression a mixture of joy and something deeper, understanding, perhaps, of what this evening represented, beyond mere culinary service. You're welcome, I said simply. It's what family does. The words surprised me even as I spoke them, their sincerity unexpected. She smiled, hearing the significance beneath the casual phrase. Yes, it is. She squeezed my hand briefly. Now I'll let you get back to creating magic. As she left, I caught sight of my mother through the kitchen door, elegant as always in navy blue, her silver-streaked hair arranged perfectly. She was speaking with Fletcher's future mother-in-law, gesturing animatedly in a way I rarely saw her do in social settings. My father stood nearby, one hand casually in his pocket, the other holding a glass of the Chateauneuf du Pape he had chosen for tonight after consulting with me at length about the menu pairings. They looked happy, genuinely engaged in the moment rather than performing social obligations. It struck me that perhaps they had always had this capacity, but something in our family dynamic had made authentic connection difficult. Or perhaps they had changed, as I had changed. Growth wasn't linear or limited by age, after all. The main course featured heritage lamb prepared 3 ways, a nod to the technique I had used for the Thanksgiving turkey, but elevated and refined. The sauce, a reduction that had taken days to develop, contained subtle notes of rosemary that evoked the Sullivan family garden where I had first experimented with herbs as a child. The accompanying spring vegetables celebrated new beginnings, while the plating design created a sense of harmony between distinct elements. When I finally emerged from the kitchen after dessert had been served, a modern interpretation of wedding cake flavors that previewed tomorrow's celebration, the room fell into a momentary hush before erupting into applause. Fletcher stood, raising his glass. To my incredible sister who has given us not just a meal but an experience none of us will forget, he said, his voice steady but emotion evident in his eyes. Maeve, you've shown us all what it means to transform ingredients into art, limitations into possibilities, and complicated histories into new beginnings. I felt my cheeks warm at this public acknowledgement, so different from the dismissive comments and overlooked achievements of the past. My gaze moved around the room, taking in the genuine appreciation on the faces of family members who had once seemed indifferent to my existence, much less my talents. My mother caught my eye from across the room, raising her glass in a small, private toast. In that moment, I saw something I had spent a lifetime searching for. Pride, yes, but also regret for opportunities missed and hope for a future where we might know each other better. After the toasts concluded and guests began to mingle again, I made my way to where my parents stood near the dessert display. "That was extraordinary, Maeve," my father said, his typical reserve softened by genuine admiration. "Every element told a story, built towards something meaningful, rather like what you've done with your restaurant." "The lamb was perfectly executed," my mother added. "And that sauce, there were flavors in it I couldn't even identify, but somehow they reminded me of spring at the lake house." I smiled, pleased by her perception. "That was intentional. Spruce tips and wild ramps, similar to what grows near the property. I wanted to evoke shared memories without being too literal." "Well, it worked," my father said with surprising emotion. "It brought back that spring when you were about 10, and you insisted on cooking breakfast for everyone using only what you could gather yourself." I stared at him, stunned that he remembered. "The wild blueberry pancakes with pine-infused syrup. You actually recall that?" "Of course I do." He looked almost hurt by my surprise. "It was inedible, frankly. The pine overwhelmed everything. But it was the most creative disaster I'd ever tasted. I should have encouraged that spirit. More instead of." He trailed off, unwilling or unable to articulate the regrets that hung between us. Instead of suggesting I focus on more practical interests, I finished for him. He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I didn't understand that I was causing it instead." The simple acknowledgement landed with unexpected force. All those years of feeling misunderstood, dismissed, overlooked, and now this moment of clarity between us. Not dramatic or over-emotional in classic Sullivan fashion, but real nonetheless. "Well," I said after a moment, "it seems to have worked out despite your concerns." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "More than worked out. You've built something remarkable, Maeve. Both professionally and—" He gestured around the room, where family members were laughing and talking, connected by the experience I had created. In other ways as well. My mother, not typically comfortable with emotional directness, surprised me by adding, "We're very proud of you. We should have said that long ago, and much more often." I felt something shift and settle inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, which implied a clean slate that wasn't realistic given our history, but acceptance. Of who they were, of who I was, of the imperfect but genuine connection we were building. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than I expected it would." Later, after the guests had departed and my team was packing up equipment, Fletcher found me in the kitchen, overseeing final cleanup. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, "did it go as you hoped?" I considered the question, its layers and implications. Professionally, yes. The execution was nearly flawless, and the reception was everything a chef could want. And, personally, he pressed gently. I met his gaze directly. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. That's what surprised me most. I wasn't cooking to show what they'd missed or what I'd accomplished despite them. I was just creating something I wanted to share. He nodded, understanding. "That's growth, May, for all of us." He hesitated, then added, "You know you've changed them, right? Especially Dad. I've never seen him so interested in something outside his usual sphere. Last week he asked me if I thought you'd consider teaching him some basic techniques sometime. Actually, learning to cook, at 63. The image made me smile, my precise, controlled father venturing into the creative chaos of cooking. I'd consider it, though he should be prepared for brutal honesty about his technique. Fletcher laughed. I think that's exactly what he's hoping for, strangely enough. The authentic Maeve Sullivan experience. As we finished cleaning and prepared to leave, Serena approached with a question about tomorrow's restaurant service. While we discussed logistics, I noticed her easy interaction with Fletcher, the natural way my professional and personal worlds were beginning to integrate, not colliding or competing, but finding points of harmony. Outside, the spring night was cool but not cold, the sky clear and scattered with stars. Fletcher and I walked to our cars together, a comfortable silence between us until we reached the parking area. "Tomorrow's the big day," I said, keys in hand. "Nervous?" He shook his head, expression serene in a way I hadn't seen before. "Not even a little. It feels right, you know? Like everything is exactly where it should be." I knew he was talking about Isabel, about their relationship and future, but something in his words resonated with my own experience of the evening. The sensation of pieces finally finding their proper alignment, not through force or compromise, but through honest recognition of what was possible now. "I do know," I replied. "See you tomorrow, then. Try to get some sleep." He grinned. "Chef's orders?" "Exactly." The drive back to my apartment was quiet, the streets of Greenwich nearly empty at this late hour. I found myself reflecting not just on the evening's success, but on the journey that had brought me here. From the overlooked middle child seeking validation to the accomplished chef creating on my own terms. From defining myself in opposition to my family to finding ways to connect authentically without sacrificing my identity. It hadn't been a straight path. There had been detours, dead ends, moments when turning back seemed easier than forging ahead. But each step, each choice, even the painful ones, had shaped me into someone who could stand firmly in both worlds, the professional one I had built through talent and determination, and the personal one I was reclaiming through newfound understanding. As I parked outside my building, I noticed crocuses had pushed through the small patch of earth near the entrance, purple and gold against the darkness, persistent in their emergence despite the lingering chill. I paused to observe them, these small emblems of resilience and renewal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Fletcher's wedding, a full restaurant service, the ongoing navigation of family relationships still finding their footing. But tonight, in this moment, I felt a quiet certainty that had eluded me for most of my life. Not that everything would be perfect. Perfection was an illusion I had abandoned along with my need for external validation, but that I was capable of meeting whatever came next with authenticity and strength. I had found my place at the table. Not the one they had set for me all those years ago, with its unspoken rules and conditional acceptance, but one I had crafted myself, expansive enough to welcome others without diminishing my own presence. And that, I realized as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, was the most satisfying creation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.